The packet arrived like a bomb wrapped in good manners. It was heavy, hot from the courier's hands, its leather binding smelling faintly of new paper and antiseptic. I remember setting my coffee down and thinking, briefly, how odd it was that a founder could feel the weight of printed pages the way you feel a bruise forming under your skin. I opened it at my desk, and the world I had built from code and cramped dinners and borrowed bandwidth, folded into a single sentence, a leadership slate that moved me from founder with strategic authority to an operational role with restricted privileges. The legal language was precise, elegant in a way that made the cruelty worse. Proxies had been tallied. Delegations had been invoked. Signatures glinted like evidence. I was not the kind of person who cried in public. I have led hundreds of product reviews where failure could be an honest, ugly teacher. But when I read those minutes, my hands trembled. I felt the thin thread that connects you to what you make snap. Liam called as the office blurred around me. He sounded steady. Later I would replay the call until the steadiness curdled into intention. In that moment, all I heard was a practiced calm and a phrase I would hear a dozen different ways over the next weeks. We did what was best for the company. From the outside, we were a success story. Flawless photos on stage, glowing user stories, investors who loved retention curves like lovers love a favorite memory. Journalists liked our narrative because it was simple and hopeful, a product that brought dignity to people who earned in odd rhythms and deserved better than payday loans and opaque fees. That was the easy story. The harder story, the one I lived in the fluorescent hum of late nights and the lonely stretches of flight delays, involved 1,000 small choices that felt trivial then and consequential later. When you scale an idea to millions of users, governance becomes a muscle you must exercise daily. We hadn't always treated it that way. We were a scrappy team. We prioritized product. We lived in the art of solving immediate problems. Success is a tide that lifts everything but also reveals the parts of your boat that were patched with hope and chewing gum. The press didn't see the small signature blocks, the side letters, the shell entities that never keyed into our public cap table. The press did not see how private alliances could be sculpted in a corner of a restaurant. I started this company because an app felt like the smallest honest thing I could do. I code sprinted in coffee shops, scribbled user journeys on glass, and listened to delivery drivers tell me stories that reshaped product requirements. It was never about money at first. It was about making a system that treated people as people. When we got our first term sheet, I learned a new language: cap table, vesting cliffs, anti-dilution. I learned how quickly the world could translate your moral argument into line items and percentages. I also learned that I couldn't be everywhere. I needed help telling the story to the people who put up money. That help came from someone I trusted from a childhood with shared summers and the same set of inside jokes. Liam arrived like a comfortable sweater. He fit the room, suave, quick with an anecdote, adept at turning awkward investor questions into relational threads. He wasn't a founder in the sense I had been. He had not written the first lines of our code, but he learned our metrics and then learned how to sell them. He was calm in ways I wasn't. Where I saw product and process, he saw people to be coaxed. I don't think I understood how charisma can be a kind of operational efficiency. People listened to him. Investors trusted him. He made introductions and handled difficult conversations. For the public, he was the part of us that could translate purpose into policy. I took solace in his gait and his steady smile. I mistook it for alignment. Nora had been with me since the earliest days, before our Slack was full of gifs and before investor seats were carved. She was a small, steady force, the person who made sure I had time to think, who protected me from the 1,000 tiny fires a founder faces every day. I trusted her implicitly. She managed my world, my inbox, my calendar, my flights, and the small rituals that kept me human. If I was the engine, she was the oil. She did favors with a care that felt like devotion. She had a way of anticipating my days the way a good friend anticipates a mood. I never paused to consider that anyone would manipulate the kind of love she earned through consistent competence. Our app grew because it solved a real problem elegantly. 1 million users turned into 5, then 10. Institutional checks followed. Each round brought not only money but a different set of expectations about how a modern company should be run. Growth is intoxicating and brutal in the same breath. You are celebrated privately when you close a round and publicly when you hit a number. You add people to the cap table, you authorize counsel, you adopt processes. Somewhere in that rush, I began to justify a lot of things. This is an operational necessity. We must move fast. It's fine, counsel has signed off. I now know that the most innocuous phrase in startups is trusted delegation. Maya was a name that arrived in emails like a ghost. Private domains, wire instructions routed through holding entities, a few cursory references tossed into side conversations. Liam described her as an operator of liquidity corridors, a discreet person who could put together vehicles to move capital quickly and quietly. I was pragmatic. Speed had been our friend before, and we'd used private vehicles for legitimate purposes. But something in the way Liam framed it, "We keep this off the radar for runway," felt like a justification for opacity. On the other hand, our counsel had flagged no immediate legal problems. I trusted that our advisors would oppose anything that crossed lines. In my naivete, I allowed a degree of vagueness to exist because I preferred the friction of action over the paralysis of endless questioning. Liam's attention extended beyond me. He cultivated relationships with people on my team in small, careful ways. He found Nora particularly easy to flatter. He noticed the tiny seams of her life that others missed and used words like "I see you" and "you matter" to stitch a private rapport. It started with small favors, picking up an extra coffee, asking about her mother's health, complimenting the choreography of her calendar. Then came requests disguised as kindness. "Can you forward this to me? I'll handle it for Ava so she isn't disturbed. Would you archive that thread? It's just noise." He made Nora feel chosen. In the weeks that followed, those tiny acts became a conduit. I never imagined warmth could be weaponized into function. There was one night, a late-night blur before a partnership that had investors breathing down our neck, when I signed an operational delegation. The council's side note said it had been reviewed. I was tired. We were closing out a long sprint. I didn't want another delay. I signed because someone needed to be able to call certain votes fast to preserve a deal. I have relived that signature 1,000 times. On paper it was tiny, a delegation to empower certain temporary actions. In context, it became a lever that, later, aligned with a plan I couldn't imagine until the packet landed. A document meant to expedite a partnership became an instrument in a quieter, more human-engineered displacement. When the packet hit my desk, the silence in the office was like a held breath. People circled. Phone calls multiplied. Someone had arranged proxies. Someone else had counted them. The leadership slate was presented as a stewardship plan. Liam's memo spoke about continuity and risk mitigation. I remember walking the office that day, watching faces shift from confusion to maneuver. A few people looked to me for direction. I had to gather my voice like a tool and speak into the growing static. I tried to be procedural, to ask for counsel's review, to call for time. But time had been used against me. The delegation I had signed allowed procedural steps to be taken that the founder's manual did not anticipate would be used against a founder. The press was not the worst part. My private life was. The betrayal that stung most was the slow recognition that a personal relationship I had embraced had been folded into a corporate strategy. I had loved someone who had used both my public work and the people I trusted to move a plan forward. At night, the loneliness felt different. It was not only the kind that comes from being up against a crisis. It was the kind that arrived when the person you thought you'd do life with becomes the architect of your displacement. That shock was elemental. It rewired how I saw every interaction we had shared. Jules was not a lawyer. Jules was a product person who understood pattern recognition as a craft. They began pulling threads, logs, timestamps, meeting invites. They produced a file in which nothing dramatic existed alone but in aggregate suggested sustained coordination, a series of meetings, wire transfers, and forwards that traced through Nora's inbox and ended up in private vehicles. I will never forget Jules' face the first time they brought me that timeline. It wasn't triumphant. It was exhausted and grave. They showed me a chain of custody that didn't include me. Their work was not cinematic, it was meticulous and painstaking. It felt like someone returning a lost ledger. I loved Nora like family. She had my back when I was drowning. I could feel my stomach drop in a physical way as I sat opposite her, the ledger open between us. Her eyes were wide and honest. She had been forwarding threads to Liam's private email on his request. She had archived threads he said were noise. She had, in good faith shaped by flattery and trust, altered our chain of communication. Nora did not look cunning when she confessed. She looked misled. She had been given attention and small privileges and told it was for the greater good. She had been made to feel that by protecting my time she was protecting me. The realization that what she had done allowed coordination to occur in my absence felt like a second betrayal, a layering of grief. But it was not Nora's malice that brought me down. It was my own failure to foresee how affection could become an access point. Liam's seduction of organizational trust was not a Hollywood script with hidden cameras and dramatic confessions. It was quiet, an extra text here, a kind word there, a private compliment over a small piece of administrative work that made Nora feel seen in a way she had rarely been seen at the company. He positioned himself as a protector of my time in small acts, moves that felt innocuous because they reduced friction and smoothed my life. He never asked Nora to commit a clearly illegal act. He asked for forwarding, archiving, and a degree of discretion. In the vacuum created by my exhaustion and by the comfort that comes with personal affection, the functional effect was the same. Jules and Carmen, our counsel, worked together to build a credible, legally robust picture. Carmen was relentless in a way that felt surgical. We preserved servers, issued litigation holds, acquired forensic logs. Wire transfers that had once been cryptic became traceable when cross-referenced with time-stamped internal messages. The evidence did not feel cinematic in the way popular culture imagines crime-solving. It was spools of timestamps and redacted emails and a pile of small confirmations. It was the kind of truth that took patience to assemble but, once assembled, had a terrible and simple clarity. The governance steps had been orchestrated with information that never reached the entire board. Carmen advised care. Too much noise could hurt us. Too little would let momentum ossify against reason. We chose a middle path, a redacted document package to a trusted reporter that outlined procedural anomalies and the evidence of diversion. We did not aim to humiliate. We needed to change incentives. The choice to let light in was tactical. Investors hate unknown reputational risks. Once people began to realize that their names were in the orbit of questionable coordination, some got nervous. The world of limited partners and general partners is small. Reputational contagion spreads quickly. Public pressure is a form of leverage in modern governance battles, and we used it as such. The emergency board meeting was colder than I expected. People spoke in procedural tones as if the room were a courtroom and not an office where we ate pizza on Friday nights. Directors asked for timestamps. Counsel asked for logs. Nora's testimony was sober and candid. Jules' timeline lay on the table like a map to a ruin. Liam tried to explain. He sounded seasoned at deflection. He used words like stewardship and continuity. Then a document was pulled up, a wire confirmation matched to a calendar invite, and his face changed. Under pressure, the quiet grace he had always worn began to crack. Directors looked sideways at investors who had once nodded approvingly. One by one, some of those nods faltered. What surprised me was not the friction but how quickly it cascaded. Once a few major limited partners signaled discomfort, others followed. In private calls I heard phrases I had not imagined: LP exposure, regulatory scrutiny, reputational risk. Money is both patient and brittle. When reputational concerns enter, it moves fast. The private vehicles and shell entities that had seemed like clever tools now looked like telescopes pointed at potential liability. Investors who had once seemed aligned began to distance themselves. The proxies that had felt like irreversible votes were suddenly paper in a storm. The house of cards we had been living in, the fragile construct of private alignments and public trust, began to wobble. I watched Liam outside the boardroom after the meeting. He was not defiant. He was small and ordinary in a way that shocked me because I had once loved him. His phone buzzed continuously. Messages went unanswered. The warmth that used to be his armor had become a brittle shell. He looked at me, and I saw that whatever had driven him to engineer this takeover had not accounted for the moral weight of exposure. I felt, briefly, a need to understand him, to ask why. The why tasted like 1,000 ordinary motives: ambition, fear, the intoxicating rationalization that what you were doing was for the company's good. Regret, when it came fast, not in the slow, cinematic way, but in the sharpness of immediate consequence. We did not win clean. Legal battles rarely resolve into the neat justice you want in stories. We negotiated, we rescinded certain actions, and we rebuilt the board with independent directors we trusted to be truly independent. My rights were substantially restored. My equity was secured in a way that made the public narrative manageable. But the restorative work was more than legal. We rewrote policies, required independent counsel review on certain delegations, and instituted mandatory escalation protocols for gatekeepers like Nora. We trained assistants on how to handle unusual requests and made it clear that forwarding sensitive board correspondence without explicit rationale and authority was not a benign favor. We chose not to crucify Nora. She had been used by affection, manipulated into thinking she was protecting me. We offered her counseling, job protections, and a role helping rewrite the playbook for executive assistants, the very people who stand at the threshold of founders' lives. There were messy feelings. Some colleagues wanted a public scapegoat, others were tender. Nora forgave herself slowly and with embarrassment. She stayed with us, and over time she became an advocate for gatekeeper ethics, a living testimony to how vulnerability can be weaponized and how institutions must guard against it. Jules never wanted to be hailed as a hero. They wanted to ship features, to make the product better. But their curiosity saved us. The company quietly recognized them, not with public awards, but with protections and a culture shift that rewarded the kind of skeptical diligence that our new governance demanded. There is a strange moral economy in startups where those who ask uncomfortable questions can be marginalized. We worked to change that internal norm. We offered pathways for employees to raise governance concerns safely and anonymously. We made it easier for the quiet ones to speak and harder for the charismatic to do suspicious things in private. I began to think of governance like a body part you exercise. If you only ever use your legs for walking, they become strong for walking and weak for climbing. Governance must be rehearsed in conditions both benign and adversarial. We enforced independent review for any procedural delegation that could affect voting outcomes. We codified escalation steps. We created an ethics committee that included independent directors and non-executive employees. The architecture we erected was not meant to punish speed. It was meant to channel speed through transparent, auditable pathways. We made the annoying parts, the double checks, the signatures, into tools of resilience. Love, for me, became a category I treated with more skepticism. That is a painful admission. I did not stop loving the idea of love. I began to respect that intimacy and governance cannot be the same ledger. I learned to keep certain parts of my personal life separate from the levers of corporate control. Liam left the company over the next months. He faced the private consequences of his choices: fractured trust, fewer friends, and reputational harm that made future partnerships hard. He called once, a short message that felt like apology and rationalization woven together. I read it and put it away without response. Sometimes I think of him and the unspooling of who he was and what he became. Regret is complicated. It was fast for him and slow for me. Months later, the app still did what it had always done: helped people smooth cash flow, prevented small catastrophes, gave users dignity in the ways we had intended. The company's valuation recovered some of what it lost, but more than the number, it was the internal structures that mattered. We had rewritten the rulebook. Assistants were trained and protected, delegations required independent counsel, audits were no longer pro forma, independent directors received more information, not less. We turned governance into a practiced muscle. The story that began with a handshake and a packet ended with a different kind of repair. Not that we became impervious to human frailty, but that we made systems that made it harder to weaponize affection and easier to hold people accountable. If there is one brutal truth I learned, it is this: trust is a miracle and a hazard. We will continue to build with love, for the product, for the people we serve. But I will never again let my heart be the only trustee of what I create. The systems we build must be the co-owners of that trust. If you are building something, pay attention to the quiet acts, The forwarded email, the archived thread, the favor that seems small. They add up. They make or break companies. And if you ever find your life braided into the mechanics of governance, remember that evidence, process, and the brave work of ordinary people can set things right again.